what we tend to do, and mostly in the North American culture, I think, is we think, oh, we'll dummy down. And the first thing we do is we take decision making out of it. But I think we have to think about it as expanded skill set. We think about vision, decision, and precision being coupled together. What's a 1v1? Well, there's one anti-space, we call an opponent, and then there's space to exploit. So the complexity isn't great, but the nutrient-rich activity of 1v1 is perceiving, where's the opponent? How can I deceive the opponent to exploit space through, in that case, a dribble? Or if you're playing 1v1 to goals, through a shot. It's not complicated, it's just that we've gotten it wrong for so long. It's not the kids that falter, it tends to be the coach that makes that error. I want TOVO to be an alternative to the status quo traditional training, and with whom it resonates, it'll be meaningful and powerful.
Hello coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach podcast interview. This one is the last of the Spanish methodology cultural podcast that we've done from my recent trip over to Spain for Surf Cup International. So we've got Todd Beane on today, TOVO Academy, leader in coach development over the last 5-10 years here in the US. Some really strong views on player development. We've had him on a few times. I think it's his third appearance on Modern Soccer Coach podcast. The last one he did was at the start of 2022 when he did a webinar for us for our high school online coaches conference. And I'm going to give that away today. If you haven't seen it, you can get it on the link below on the website. You can download it for free just to get a look at his information, his philosophy. I'll also post about his courses and his newsletter that he puts out as well. As always, please like, please subscribe, and please share with your coaching community. Really enjoyed this interview. Love this trip. Here is Todd. Enjoy. Todd, thanks for having me. Beautiful Barcelona. I can't believe we're doing this.
Here we are.
The drums behind us. This is culture.
Finally here.
Some of the things I'm gonna pick up today are things that I've read from your methodology. You start with what do I need to know as a coach? And I've quoted this here: train intelligence if you want children to play intelligently. Your definition of intelligence.
You know, I think we talk about finding and exploiting space. I mean, all invasion games are finding and exploiting space, and football is no different, soccer is no different. So the intelligence to find space has to do with vision, decisions, and then the execution, of course, is critically important. So when we think intelligence, we've kind of expanded the skill set to include vision, decision, and then ultimately the precision to execute an idea. So we really want to nurture those players through our training exercises to be visionary, right? To be visionary, because I think good vision predicates good decisions. Good decisions, you find players that others would term, intelligent, so smart, IQ. But I think we have to think about it as expanded skill set. We think about vision, decision, and precision being coupled together. And I think that ultimately feeds into the idea of being an intelligent football player. The ability to come up with, read the cues, execute them with precision, and then do so with the courage that's required. So we end up working holistically with the children. Even though we use the word intelligence, we're talking about an expanded skill set.
Yeah. I followed your work for years. This is the first time I've ever dug deep into the methodology of it. And it's also my first time in the youth space, so part of it's a bit of self-education as well. And what I'm finding is that this part of, again, you've probably been through this 10 years, you've been fighting this isolated technique. So this idea that you build technique, then you build brains, then you build systems, and all of a sudden, a bit of mentality and you're a player. Yeah. It's nonsense.
Nonsense. It's not the way that children learn, but we know that from grandma and grandpa. I mean, you went out and you jumped in the lake to learn to swim with somebody supporting you. We're immersion learners. We're immersion learners. You're here in this culture now, right? And now you will pick up some Spanish here because out of necessity. You're immersed in a culture, you breathe the culture. We're immersion learners. We always have been as animals. So all we've done, I think, differently is to try to dissect learning into unrecognizable parts. And the sooner we put that back together holistically, we recognize that's how children learn. But grandma knew that. You know, grandma and grandpa knew that. You went out and you did the activity you wanted to do, and in the process of doing the activity, you got some pointers. Maybe a coach came in and gave you some details. Maybe mom and dad showed you how to throw a baseball or skate a little bit better. But ultimately, we're immersion learners, and all we've done, I think, to our detriment or to the detriment of the children is to take that philosophy out of traditional soccer training. Once we train kids holistically, all of the skills that we want to emerge will emerge. With patience, with persistence, a little bit of passion thrown in, but ultimately we are immersion learners and we have to train so.
Yeah, I'm also looking at my kids going through a process in the US, and I'm seeing, every sport is extremely coach-led, and every sport starts with correct action of throwing a baseball, shooting a basketball, elbows, body shapes, and I look at soccer and think, do you think the biggest problem, and we'll talk about America later, so I don't want to get into this right away, but do you think our problem with when we're looking at the immersive piece is that we think that we have to build up to go into it? Or what would be could a parent coach do what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about work like Tom Byer has done with Football Starts at Home, right? You're talking about, small toddlers getting familiar with the ball, but any ball, right? If they swim or they hike or they bike or they climb a tree, this multi-sport you do with your parents initially, right? They take you out and then you find your brother, your sister, your cousins, the kind of the events that unfolded at a barbecue or Thanksgiving, right? So this is the natural learning process. The idea that it is, as you mentioned, sequential, that we first have to be able to kick a ball before we can play. That's not how it works. We go play and then we learn to kick a ball simultaneously. It's like spontaneous combustion, where we're seeing the environment, we're reading cues even as young children, we're trying to outplay somebody. Do we want to score that way? Even tag is a game that the youngest children play. What's tag? It's a game of finding and exploiting space against Uncle Joe, and then you find a tree that's a safe space. As we mentioned, it's not, learning isn't sequential, it's not orderly, it never has been and it never will be, and to suggest so flies in the face of all skill acquisition research, in addition to what we know from our own experiences growing up. It's not that you can't go out and spend time with the ball in an isolated fashion. Of course you can. Go juggle a ball, knock a ball against the wall. If you have two of you, play soccer, tennis, or if you're out on a pond somewhere, play ice hockey with your mate and shoot and pass, these types of things. But when you're in a club or team environment, those are few hours per week. Those are the hours that we have to use the time wisely. And what we do at TOVO is we think of that as competitive and contextualized training. We don't need to use team time for isolated drills, but if a child's alone, that's the best time. Or with a dad or a mom or a mentor of any sort, where they're kicking the ball around, or even just against the wall by themselves in between classes or on the patio. All of that's going to add to the skill set. But we just think that if you're going to come together collectively, why not use the collective number of players we have to compete in context? Because that's where intelligence emerges. That's where character emerges. That's also where the skill set required to pass, receive, shoot, dribble also emerges, is in context. So we just make the distinction between team trainings and individual training out on your own with mom and dad or in a park. They're not mutually exclusive. It's just what's the best return on the investment for the time that you have in each environment. That's why I'm all in favor of individual or isolated training when you're an individual or isolated. But why do that in a team environment where you can nurture intelligence, skill, and character holistically, which is what the match requires?
100%. That was Michael's point yesterday. Same thing, Espanol. Yeah, it's got its place, but when you've got them 3 days a week, 2 days a week, you're not maximizing what you're getting from that there. It moves us along nicely. The complexity then. Another quote you had is guide children to solve ever more complex challenges. I want to ask you, can we overcomplicate it too early then? And how do we kind of balance this between complexity introduction and the coach has lost them?
Yeah. We think about cognitive fidelity, which is, being faithful to the demands of the performance environment, which would be a 4v4 match at the youngest levels, maybe 7v7. Maybe you play 8v8 in some parts of the world, or 9v9 and up to 11v11. So what we want to do is combine that complexity with a concept of scaffolding, which is you're kind of scaffolding the complexity. But what people tend to do is they make it a technical scaffold. Let's take out decision making and just make the scaffold kick a ball. That's, I think, our greatest error. We can maintain the integrity of perception, decisions, and actions, but then we can reduce the complexity by having a child outplay fewer numbers of players. I'll give you an example. What's a 1v1? Well, there's one anti-space, we call an opponent, and then there's space to exploit. So the complexity isn't great, but the nutrient-rich activity of 1v1 is perceiving, where's the opponent? How can I deceive the opponent to exploit space through, in that case, a dribble? Or if you're playing 1v1 to goals, through a shot. So in other words, what we tend to do, and mostly in the North American culture, I think, is we think, oh, we'll dummy down. And the first thing we do is we take decision making out of it. That's the greatest error we make in traditional training. Keep the decision making, but just reduce the number of variables. So you're reducing the cognitive complexity, not necessarily the technical complexity. That's a massive difference when you think about holistic development. Maintain the decision as part of that, put it in context, and then have a child execute a skill or choose from a varied number of skills, and then keep score and see how it goes. And then if you can go from there, you outplay two. Maybe there's three of us and two of them. How can we outplay 3v2? So you can see what we're doing is we're scaffolding complexity, but maintaining the integrity of the skill acquisition requirements, which is perception and action being coupled. It's not complicated, it's just that we've gotten it wrong for so long. It's not the kids that falter, it tends to be the coach that makes that error. Because the kids are more than capable of finding and exploiting space in context. But I'm not saying they're going to master, but that's not what children are. Children are in the process of learning how to find and exploit space. So it's going to be a little bit chaotic, it's going to be ugly, they're going to fall over themselves, and some are going to chase some butterflies. All part of the process. It's never going to be as orderly as we tend to think it is or want it to be. I think most coaches want it to be orderly, where learning is nothing but a sort of a chaotic, dynamic process.
Yeah, which brings me along nicely again. Is that then the difference between you have in terms of your online work, you have a difference in positional play and systems of play. So systems of play more, I suppose, more directive, whereas positional play is a bit more flexibility and freedom in it.
And I think that's what's happening now. You see some people talking about relationism and other forms of interpretations of the game. I think they want a narrative where position play isn't fluid, dynamic, and creative. That's not even close to being true. Because if you think about Johan Cruyff, who was the poster child of this kind of total football, what was it? It was fluid interchange of movement, finding and exploiting space and context against an opponent. Matter of fact, Johan would play the 9, but he'd come back and dribble out of the back, or play a 6 and move about. There'd be interchange with overlapping backs and so forth. So I think we've taken the nomenclature, the words, and done a disservice to the game. All football is fluid chess. What position do you occupy when to exploit space that the opponent is affording you such that you can outscore them? Teaching children then the most fundamental process of scanning, choosing, and doing should be the fundamental skill to start with. Then in the process of choosing, they will either dribble, pass, shoot, play the ball backwards, move off the ball. So the idea is that technical execution is the execution of an idea, but without the idea, it's quite fruitless. And it's always an idea that is thought of in context. Now, the child may or may not make great decisions, but that's something that will come. The idea is that they have to make a decision as to what technical action do they want to do to accomplish an objective. That's the integrity of the game. And that's what we talk, whether it's playing with your mates or playing pickup or being in a training environment as such. You find in Europe, they really maintain more than in the United States, for example, the integrity of the idea and the execution of that.
100%, but it's so interesting because going back to your point about it probably breaks down with the coaches, it breaks down with the structure in terms of we think that, again, you're talking about intelligence. I think this is maybe because I find this myself, maybe because we associate intelligence with academia and we associate academia with lectures, so we slow it down, more information. Like how would you say, let's talk about coach action and let's talk about a session then. Should the coach be relatively agile in stopping it, given that instruction? How would you say to go through that?
I'm working as methodology director here at a club, Gymnastic de Tarragona, and I'm still working on this. What is the role of the coach to facilitate learning, to maximize learning? Well, one, we have to understand how children learn. They learn in contextual and competitive environments. That's where they learn best, to play a game that is competitive and contextual. That's number one. So we get all the coaches on board with that philosophy that this is a dynamic game of rhythm. This is a fluid chess, right? This is chaotic at its best. And we'll try to impose some order through systems of play, but we don't even need to worry about that with young players. When we run through our sessions, I think the first question we ask is, are we promoting joy? The second is, are we maximizing learning? And then when we think about maximizing learning, we think about, are we employing these pedagogical strategies to do so? Competitive and contextualized training. Okay, that's your platform for departure. Then the instruction begins, your first training exercise. The most critical skill I think a coach needs to understand and execute is observation. Just sit back and watch this learning process unfold. Take notes individually and collectively, and then very sparingly jump in. And we always use a 3P protocol if your coaches are interested. You're either going to pause it and then pose a question, praise the child, or perfect an action. We've been taught in a lot of our federation licenses that we should always step in and correct an action. That actually flies against the face of research. We should praise more often than we perfect, and we should pose questions for understanding, and we should perfect as needed, which is explicit. Now, when you work with novices, you might have a little bit more explicit instruction, and as the kids advance into young teenagers and then into advanced players, maybe a little bit more emphasis on the implicit training session and exercise. So if you think about that combination, it's critically important that your exercise demands all that the game affords. That's what's critically important. If you're choosing a linear static exercise, you're not going to nurture intelligence and character, you're going to nurture obedience. So your training exercise is what speaks for you the loudest. Then you sparingly, after observing, jump in and praise, pose or pause, play on and let them play. The most important thing in training exercises is the rhythm, the intensity, and the competitive nature of an exercise. Because if those are in the exercise, then it's nutrient rich, and I as a coach can step back and observe. And that's my greatest skill set, to observe. And sparingly, quickly, and precisely jump in to jump out. So I think a lot of coaches think, when I'm young, I have to instruct. I have to step in and explain everything. No, you've got to use a training exercise that speaks to the demands of the game. And then you sparingly jump in with your wisdom or insight at an individual or collective level, and you get out so the kids can play. You know, every kid that's ever played the game hates when the coach interrupts the training. They're like, here we go again. We were just getting a rhythm. Give them what they want, because that's where they're learning how to play the next play. When we stop it, we disrupt the learning process more than we think.
Hello coaches, we'll take a quick break here. Thank you so much for watching the interview. Thank you so much for following and supporting all the work on Modern Soccer Coach. It's almost at the end of the year. You might have a couple of weeks off. You might even have 3 or 4 weeks off before the season starts again. And if you're looking for some development opportunities, please check out Modern Soccer Coach website. We've got our online tactical analysis course. We've also got some opportunities with individual consultations. So if you're in the off-season process and you want to look back and review some of your work, or get some feedback on your game model, or get some feedback on some processes, please feel free to go to modernsoccercoach.com/shop and check out, again, the online course, the individual consultation. We're working with a lot of coaches in the off-season to try and review, try and reflect, and try to improve on the upcoming season. You can do it at training sessions, you can do a match analysis, or we've also got some data options as well. Again, we're always striving to get better. We're always looking to improve. We really, really appreciate the support. Back to Todd. I ran 2 sessions at the start of the week with the surf group, and it's the best coaching I've ever done. In terms of being more aware of trying to do things and stepping back and catching myself and doing that. I'm not telling you that to impress you. I'm telling you that because I think it took me 20 years. I was that young coach. So this is how can we get there without having to go through this painful process of 20 years? Because you are going to have that coach who, maybe it's ego, insecurity, like we've all been there. Is there a way through that? Is there a psychological profile of a coach in the journey?
Well, I think there's a couple, in the United States, there's a couple avenues into coaching. One is you were a former player and you want to stay within the game, and you go back to your community, your club or organization, and you volunteer or get a stipend typically. That's grassroots coaching. The other way in is some volunteer, which is usually a parent whose kid's on the team and they don't have a coach and they have to jump in, right? So I think the onus upon us as educators is to really think first and foremost of the grassroots coach. The elite coaches are going to have an easier pathway because maybe they have the funds and the resources and the connections and the network to really engage. Really, we need to focus on the young grassroots coaches, the novices, the aspiring coaches, those parent volunteers. And I think what we need to do in that case is, and we're going to introduce a grassroots course here in the new year in January 2025. What I recognize is there's content overload for the coaches. So I think you can teach the game with one model, and we'll introduce this in January of 2025, an app model, we call it APP. by teaching the understanding of architecture through triangles and diamonds, position of each player on a green highway, we'll call that for the youngest kids, an open passing lane, and then the profile they adopt to have better vision of the past where the ball is and the future where the space is. I think with one model, the APP model, architecture, position, profile, we can give coaches a model from which they need not deviate. There's so much in there. And then we need to teach them, okay, good content plus good instruction. And then we have to move away from the model of the teacher lecture, stepping in, correcting, fixing everything. And we have to move to a facilitating model where there's explicit instruction, which is timely, there's implicit instruction through the exercise itself, and a coach can sit back recognizing that, hey, I'm watching my children learn, and when it's in a moment that's precise and particular, I can step in and step out. So we look at teaching, and this is where I think most coaches don't come from. They don't come from a background in education. I was fortunate to come from a background in education. You have to think about what to teach is content and how to teach is instruction. When we speak about content, we need to simplify it for grassroots coaches and for the players in that way. And for the coaches, we have to teach them how to teach based upon sound pedagogical practices. Scaffolding, dynamic, desirable difficulties, challenging the kids, being positive and passionate, and sending them home with smiles and high fives. It's not complicated. I think we've complicated and given the youth coaches and the grassroots coaches more than they can handle too early. And I think we can guide them a little bit better. I hope the federations, not just the United States, I hope Canadians, Mexican, United States, through North America and everywhere else, is really taking on that grassroots agenda, because that's where those kids get introduced to the game. That's where they'll decide whether they stay in the game.
I see so much pressure. I don't know whether coaches are putting it on themselves or we're putting it on society. The pressure to answer every question, the pressure to be that, and that's obviously going to offset if it keeps. There's an outlet sometimes, and that outlet is actually was one of my next questions about teaching character, and which we're all going to be. We can all teach it in pre-season on day one. We're looking for these actions, and on day 25, we're all tired and cranky, and we'll make mistakes. How do you think then? Like for the coach who's got maybe a small staff in the middle of nowhere, and that's having I wish my coaches would be maybe a bit more enthusiastic, or a bit more, like you said, modeling the behaviour to drive a little bit more out of it. It seems to be today that's a bit more difficult.
Yeah. Well, remember I spoke about the training exercise and speaking for you? If we use static, linear exercises, there is no energy there. The only energy is externally, thrown into that. And if you're lucky, you have players that'll pay attention to boring drills. Probably not going to happen. Or your coach, you need to be overly exuberant. This is great. Pretend that cone is a defender and go for it. Doesn't work. I found that in my years of coaching, that when you're out playing cones, there's no motivation. There's no energy. As soon as you play a game of any sort, whether it's a rondo, position play, training game of any sort, and you're playing to keep score, to win, to outplay, and there's consequences for success and there's consequences for failure, the motivation of the players rises, the attention stays more attuned to the task at hand. And so as a coach, you could bring in the energy, but the energy that you bring is complementary to the exercise and activity, not the only energized element within that activity. So that's why I say if you're teaching exercises or employing exercises that are dynamic by nature, that are self-regulating by nature, then you can just impose a little bit of passion and instruction, but it's not coach dependent to drive that and then to raise 10 players, 12 players, 20 players, motivation levels. No, we want the passion to come from the coach, but that passion should be inherent in the exercise, and then you get a balance. And then what you find in those competitive exercises, quite frankly, some kids don't want to compete. They've been signed up by their parents, and it's just not for them. But that's fine. You find that out early, and hopefully they find music, art, science, dance, theater. And those kids that want to be there and want to compete from young ages are going to want to come back for more. And those are the kids who are going to stay in the game past 11, 12, and 13. And then the best of them are going to go on and play in college or pros. But I think it's really, I don't think we can expect a coach to be the only one that brings the passion. And I think that's where we need to think about the exercises, the content, and of course, the energy that we model, which is we're good to go, we're ready to go, and this is going to be a competitive day. And we always say at TOVO, we bring them in for priming. We say you need to be right now in our circle before training starting. This is the initial part of training. If for any reason you're not here today, mentally, psychologically, physically, you're just not feeling it, you have a responsibility to every other child, every other athlete to step out now. No questions asked, but step out now, because from this circle, going forward for the next 90 minutes, you need to be in and on. And then the expectation is high. And when they're in and on, we bring out the best in them, we bring out the best in ourselves, and what we find is we don't have to be cheerleader because they're engaged. Yeah. But then we have to follow that and not punish a kid who decides for whatever reason, because there's other things going on in the kids' life. So we say, we need your attention and intention. We need your attention to the task at hand. We're going to compete as soon as we leave this circle. And we need that to the best of your ability so that you have fun and then behave while you're doing it. And we've got them. Then we've got them.
Just on the environment then at TOVO, when you have the residential and you bring groups of coaches in, you're starting to do it in the US and go around and do the North Carolina and do them in Texas, and you're all over the place. You're obviously going to have to challenge the coaches to think a little bit more, but also like challenge a lot of bad habits that coaches fall into, I'm guessing. Where do you sit on the, hey, I'll meet you where you are, and the Raymond Verheyen tier of the spectrum? Like, how do you maneuver there? How do you poke?
Listen, I think when you talk about context, every team is in a community, which is the context in which it resides, right? Every coach has their own context within the game and beyond the game, their jobs, their lives, their families. What we tend to do with TOVO when I go around is, keep in mind now, I'm not working when I go and do that with the elite players. It's not just, oh, this works in Barcelona because you're working at Nastic and all your kids are, easily collegiate players, if not pros, right? So we work, when I go to the United States, we're working with grassroots. What I mean by that is, for me, all soccer in the United States and elsewhere, youth soccer is recreational soccer. It's all recreational soccer. No one's getting paid to play until they're pro. So when we have the mentality of, if you're a coach, are you in and on? Do you want to be here and you want to engage to maximize learning and joy? And if you do, then you don't get to opt out. You get to opt out before you sign up. So the standards are quite high in terms of, if you choose to volunteer, which I've done in the past, my time and energy to any endeavor, the onus is upon me to bring my best self. So that has to be a high standard for coaches. Now what we can do is give them really concrete, powerful, research-based content with which to work, and then we can give them the instructional strategies of how to provide feedback through that 3P model. Literally, with an app model and a 3P intervention model, you could take grassroots coaching to the next level. But at the end of the day, the coach has to bring his or her best self to the equation. Because if they don't, kids smell. It's like dogs that smell they sniff out the people that don't like dogs, right? Kids, if anything, they can sniff out the coach that isn't their authentic self. So I think we just have to be disciplined and ask coaches sometimes, say, do you want to be here? Because these kids need a mentor that wants to be here and that wants to delve into nutrient-rich content and do so based upon sound pedagogical practices. And if you don't, fair enough. But we need to have you in and on as a coach so that we can ask the players to be in and on. So for me, it's never the level. I mean, I literally have worked with 6-year-old players that came out of school for the first day of their soccer training, and I've had a chance to work with professional players or at professional clubs. For me, the players are never the problem. It can be the environment around. You mentioned about parents can sometimes distort that pure process, and then sometimes coaches, we can complicate it. But I found that everywhere in the world, I've literally been from Christchurch to California and from grassroots to professional, the kids are always ready to go. I find them to be the easiest part of the equation. Right?
When you're kind of back in that US space and you're going around the clubs, have you seen any changes in the last 5 years?
Better uniforms? Better uniforms. Listen, I want to be honest about this because I will never criticize a coach that volunteers their time and energy in a positive fashion, because they are doing the most important work for a child. They are providing a mentor to that child. So it's never about the person or the club or the organization specifically. It's really about, can we improve the process of being better educators with better content so that the children become better, not just better footballers, but better people and global citizens. That's the ultimate objective, to promote learning and joy. Anybody in that process has to be available to that joy as well as to the teaching.
So Todd, on that, sorry to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but do they have a responsibility? Because you know yourself, you've heard it, you go into a club and you've probably sat in front of 50 coaches and you've got 35, 40 eating out of your hand and 5 are like this, and then the other 5 are saying, I'm fine, I've got it. So every coach, every team in America seems to have this challenge. Are you saying there that, like, because you are even a volunteer to take money out of it, you have a responsibility to the education, to the self-development?
Yeah, because does a child know how much money you're making? A child wants an adult in their life that's an advocate, a mentor, a passionate, positive leader. So do we have the right to say, well, you make twice as much as I do, so you have to be twice as passionate? I don't think so. If that's our mentality, we should never be in coaching. I've taught children for free. I've taught children at the university level. I've trained children for free in various parts of the country, including with Native American children in my own country that could not afford anything of a sophisticated environment. Through Johns Hopkins, we provided that. I've worked for free, and I've worked for a lot of money at Chivas Guadalajara and other places. That cannot be commensurate with my commitment to a child. So if I don't want to be there, if I'm making $1 million, there's no justification because I'm wealthy. If I don't want to be there and I'm a volunteer, that's not a justification because the child doesn't know the difference and should never even have to consider the difference. If you're an adult in a child's life, you have a responsibility to be a positive, passionate mentor. And if you don't want to be that, you can go into banking and other places in the world where you're not required to work with young people. The moment you're out here with young person, as a volunteer, as a referee, as a coach, as a delegado, as a ball, shagger, whatever it happens to be, the children deserve your best. So that standard for me is very high. And it's okay, if you don't want that, because as we know, there's a lot of stuff that's a pain in the butt. But if you don't want the good, the bad, and the ugly, you don't step into coaching. You just can't, you have an obligation to children. And that's the greatest obligation you have. So no, you don't get to cut out just because of the paycheck.
I don't want to name the person who shared all your work, but he also gave me a question. Chris Simpson, I said I'd give him a shout out.
Yeah, fire away. Let's go. Let's go.
All right,
we got time.
He gave me 3 questions, but I picked this one because I thought this is really good.
Let's cover.
He should be doing my job. So you're partnering with clubs with TOVO, right? You're official partners with different clubs. He's asked, how do you judge the success of the development of those clubs with your methodology?
Yeah, it's a good question. What we do is we have first clarity of purpose, promoting learning and joy. From there you start to gauge through various methods on how you can gauge baseline to better. Let me take a football example. Okay, well, you can do surveys about player satisfaction, parent satisfaction when you talk about engagement and so forth. Okay, you can watch numbers increase and teams grow, etc. So you can kind of get a gauge of the satisfaction of your client base, which are parents, and the beneficiaries of those are players. But that's a quite straightforward, simple process of feedback surveys. When you get into football, we have to say, are they learning? What is learning? Learning is a capacity to have a change in behavior or skill set so that you are accomplishing more than you did otherwise from your baseline departure point. Video's probably one of the best. So I'll just give you a simple example. Can we take a video of what the children are capable in a series of exercises? 4v2 rondo, 4v4 plus 4 position play exercise, 7v7 match. Let's document what baseline is on day 1. And let's do the same dimensions of those exercises 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later, 8 weeks. This is one example. 8 weeks later, a season later. Have the kids improve their capacity to find solutions and execute those solutions with precision. And then you can subset that on the defensive side of the ball, the attacking side of the ball. So video is probably the easiest way, and I say that because it's probably the most cost-effective way. The problem with match results is this. You don't control the referee, you don't control the weather, you may not control the pitch size, and you certainly don't control the opponent. So I'll give you an example. I went from coaching a team where I was coach of the year and we had the most winning season in the history of this said school. I moved to Hawaii to a baseball school, basically, that had a soccer team. I got thrown into the position, right? They had never won a game, right? So if I think that the metric of my performance as a coach or the value as a coach is on wins and losses, well, just by flying across the Pacific, I became a terrible coach. It could have been the case. I don't put it out, but I'm going to use an excuse. Right? The team had never won. We won the last game, and I can tell you, the barbecue, the festival we had with the Hawaiian parents, I feasted for days on that food, right? So that's the danger of victory as being the only metric. So what we do with any club is we establish what are the metrics that we want to accomplish. Learning and joy. Within learning, what do the kids want? We want children to be more intelligent, more skillful, and demonstrate a character that is ambitious and positive. So now we put in the structure to take baseline snapshots, if you will, and then we can watch them over the course of fall season, spring season, 2 years. You know what happens? They end up winning more. Every place we've implemented the methodology, although it wasn't the stated objective, the metric of victory, we were more victorious. South Africa, we were champions in every level of youth academy, right? Even at Truckee River United, a mountain town in the beautiful Sierra Nevadas by Lake Tahoe, humble club. Used to go down to Sacramento area and lose match upon match by a lot. They're winning, and they're winning leagues, and they're winning championships. How does that happen? It happens because you set the metrics of learning and joy, and the manifestation of really maximizing learning and promoting profound joy is victory. But as soon as you shoot victory as the top goal, you will ethically or unethically do whatever it takes to win. As soon as you say we want to promote learning and joy and have the metrics in place to gauge it, you will win, which is ironic, right? But if I want to win, okay, so we're here in wonderful Spain. If I want to come here and compete for the under 13 cup, whatever the cup is, I don't know, trophy, whatever. Surf Cup International under 13, whatever they give you, I don't know. Yeah. I take January born or early month born, early matures that are bigger, stronger, faster, and I kick the ball down the pitch knowing that they're going to outplay small players. You can win at 12, 13, 14 just on size and strength and physical maturation alone. That doesn't mean that those children will still be involved in the game at any high level. Matter of fact, if you look here, if you watched Barcelona play, right, recently, you went to the Champions League match, did you not?
Yeah.
They just played Brest, right?
Well, Sunday night, yeah.
Take a look at the height of those players.
Yeah.
Take a look at the age of those players. How does a player that's physically inferior to the opponent have that much success? Because they have the character and the intelligence and the skill holistically to outplay an opponent. If you just come down the scale from Barcelona down to grassroots, why not focus on character, intelligence, skill the first day of training? Because we know that's going to benefit the players.
I couldn't believe the Division 3 game, the Barcelona B game. You know, tough challenge, more physical sides, more older, stronger, more experienced. Their kind of appetite for the fight, and then the other night at the Olympic Stadium, you know, as good as they are so good in possession. Every 50-50, every chance to repress, every second ball, every block tackle. It's amazing. So you think that as an Irish person, you grow up thinking it's either one or the other. You know, we don't have the skill, but we can fight.
Yeah.
And these guys today have both.
Yeah. Remember, I had a Scottish coach. Bobby Clark was my coach. The first time he came from Scotland across the Atlantic, he was at Dartmouth College, and then he went on to Stanford and great success at Notre Dame, and an amazing mentor. Yeah. I remember thinking, the first objective, I don't know if I've ever told the story, but I knew, you know what Scots love, right? So I figured I need to bloody my nose within the first 5 days of training, because then I'll have his faith and confidence, right? So sure enough, I went in against Jim Cisneros, a tall 6'3" keeper, amazing. I went in knowing I had no chance to get the ball because I knew the Scots loved getting stuck in, came away bloodied, and I just let it bleed so he would know that I had the character. I didn't have enough skill to play beyond that level, but at least I could convince him I had the character to storm, get through those New England days and go out and play the Ivy League matchup.
He was loving it.
Oh, I love it. But this is the beauty of the game, to be fair. The Scots have their interpretation, and there's cultural elements a part of that. And here you're in Catalonia, so we interpret the game differently here.
Yeah.
And most of that comes from the interpretation that Johan had us believe in.
Yeah.
44 years ago. Or 34 years ago, when Johan arrived, he changed the entire culture, and now we value intelligent, skillful play with the character to compete against those brutes from Scotland. And
so now, whenever, like the first interview I had with you, I think it was 6 years ago, and it was like, we have a disgrace on our hands, Gary, and now like I feel as if I don't even think you're under the surface. I think like if you're talking about some of the best, most impactful coach developers in the US landscape at the minute, they won't say the federation. There's people like you come up really, really quickly. So how do you think we're doing across the board? Do you still think it's really, really bad, or do you think we're...
Well, I think
making any growth?
Okay, and I think you're the only one that called me for an interview years ago. So you were like, "Who is this guy?" I don't even know how you found me, but it's a little bit different now. But I'll tell you why. In interviews at that time, and through a few tweets back in the day, I tried to warn the United States, even on the women's side, of the complacency of victory, because I was watching young Catalan and Spanish girls, really girls at that point, emerge into amazing women. Right? And I try to warn my home country, the United States. I said, what's coming across the Atlantic is going to shock you. It's going to shock us all. Within 5 years, Spain won the under-17, the under-20, right? And then the National Women's World Cup, the International Women's World Cup. And everybody was kind of like, well, what happened? What happened was they committed to intelligent training that values, in its holistic fashion, the management of oneself, the management of space, and as a consequence, the management of the ball. If you're going to play on the world stage, we have to look at world leaders. You look at the professional game. I mean, I would like to think that Scotland is one of the, the leading flag bearers of, trophies on the international level. It's not. So Scotland has a choice, as an example. Do I just stick with what's been culturally relevant, the status quo, and lose and not go to major tournaments? Or if we do, we go and we're out right away? Or do we adapt to what the rest of the world is doing, and particularly those at the highest level that are winning? England was one of the last bastions. Cruyffian football would never make it across the Atlantic Channel, right? Remember that? Yeah, well then Pep took a little plane across, and not just Pep, Arsene Wenger before him and others, but all of a sudden you had the import of a concept that was different from the Cruyffian model, and now you can't escape it. You can't escape, and now the other coaches in England, throughout the UK, are thinking, okay, do I stick to the status quo for cultural and historical reasons and fail, or do I adapt to the modern game, and do I teach in a way that's going to give our children the best opportunity to have success within the grounds and beyond? And I don't think there's really a choice there. You have to look at the best. You have to look at what they're doing. Then you have to bring it home in a manner that works with your children in your environment, and then learn and build from there. Now, coming to your question about the US, is it disastrous? No, because if we think about how many million children are playing sport, and I don't even think about just soccer, I think about the more children are playing sport, the more chance they will have to engage productively and positively in society. So when our metric is sport participation, I think the US on both the women and the men's side is doing quite well. Then you can get into the micro detail of, are we teaching football or soccer as best we can? Then I would say no, but I think we need to have diversity of opinion. So I know what the federation approaches. I did my A license years ago. I don't have it anymore. And I went back all the way to the grassroots, and I've gone through again. Do I agree with it? Not completely. Are there good people putting forth a plan? A productive, positive one? Yes. But I think we need a little bit of diversity, and that's what I want TOVO to be. I want TOVO to be an alternative to the status quo traditional training. And with whom it resonates, it'll be meaningful and powerful. And for those for whom it makes no sense, great, there will be a clear of purpose on another methodology that suits them. We need the diversity of instruction, but we all have to be attuned to the best instructional strategies so that we maximize learning. We've got a long way to go, obviously. Our women are back on top, and hopefully they'll be so, I think, again. But I think the woman on the women's side, the leadership on the women's side took a look in the mirror about Spain and France and Holland and others and thought, we're going to have to recalibrate what it means to be dominant. And so I think the Spanish women specifically, without much support, to be honest, with horrendous support, to be fair, on their own, the Aitana Bonmatis, the Alexis Putellas, the Barcelonas, the Athletic Bilbaos, the Levantes, and others are doing the service of the country. And by doing that well, I think they're doing the rest of the world a service.
See if you agree with this here. I think that, well, I get push back to, the Spanish thing that you're saying. All right, it's a great point. Spain has dominated the Premier League now, who they said they would. And also, again, Hamilton Academicals, teams that are going across and saying, yeah, we'll have a bit of this, and are having success. I see it, I definitely see it. But you'll also have people that are saying then in the US that, hey, whoa, we need to stop trying to be Belgium, Spain, Brazil. But my thing is, I don't think we've ever fully committed to doing it. Yeah. Do you agree, disagree?
So I understand the logic behind that. There's definitely some truth and some validity to that argument. You just can't take something off the shelf and plug it in and expect it to work. It's got to be a full commitment to what we're trying to do. But what I think we learned from Spain and we learned from Brazil, let's use those two examples. Where do children learn in Spain? I can tell you. They learn, see that there's a school over there? At lunchtime for an hour and a half, there were kids on a patio playing football for an hour and a half. Because my child was doing that, now he's here in the tournament, but was doing that from kindergarten to first grade, second grade. They learned on the patio. You talk about Brazilian players. Why does the quality of Brazilian players come out to inspire the world? Through favelas, or through street football, whatever it may be. It's not that you're going to then create slums, in Simsbury, Connecticut, right? And you're not going to have every patio, full with kids in the United States because they'll be doing other sports. Right? And particularly in the winter in Minnesota, probably not going to happen. So then you say, but what are the elements that are transferable from those cultures? What does a patio here and a favela have in common? Competitive and contextualized training. What haven't we done? We haven't provided nutrient-rich, competitive and contextualized training in our methodology in the United States because we've dissected football into unrecognizable parts. It's not that we haven't brought Brazil and Spain, it's that we've violated sound pedagogical practices for 35 years, expecting something to emerge. Did I piss somebody off by saying that? I don't know. I think I can defend that. I can defend that because I literally as I go across the country, I still see traditional training that has nothing to do with preparing a child for the cognitive, physical, and technical demands of a match under the professed idea that we are going to dummy it down because our kids can't. The first thing we need to do in the United States is stop saying that our kids can't and then have a long litany of excuses. Our kids, like every other kid in the world, can when we provide them the nutrient-rich environment and the support to do so. We're full of excuses in the United States, and once we get rid of those, we'll be better off. And then we can make it American. Then we can make it, flavored red, white, and blue.
I am, I suppose, American by citizenship, but not by birth. And you are American, full-blood American. What is American? People say we should stick to our culture, and I'm like, what is American culture? Can you define that?
I'll tell you, the American culture I grew up has nothing to do with some of my teammates' culture.
Yeah.
I was fortunate. You know what I had to worry about? Going to school, getting good grades, playing sport, and coming home and going to bed on time. I lived in suburbia. I lived in a house. I didn't have to worry about food and shelter. I didn't have conflict. I had to catch fly balls and play ice hockey and kick a ball around. I grew up in a culture in the United States of suburbia that has nothing to do with somebody that grew up in another part of the world, another part of the States, not even 25 minutes away from me in inner city Hartford. Those kids had all different struggles that I'm glad I didn't have. So when we say, what is the culture of the United States? Where do you go? Texas? Minnesota? Suburbia? Inner city? On the Native American reservations? Because I can tell you, most people have never been on a Native American reservation. That culture has nothing to do, and the challenges those kids face have nothing to do with Simsbury, Connecticut suburbia. So I often question that and say, well, what do you mean American culture? Where? Which one? If you're saying it's the diversity, then of course all kids should have an opportunity to participate in sports. I would agree. When you say playing style, what's an American playing style? We have Latinos that play a style that's particularly, Latin-based on the ball. Then you have the Northerners, the Poles up in Chicago, and the Swedes up in Minnesota. I mean, I know this is traditional, but there's still pockets. You have the Portuguese in inner city Hartford, where I used to go play from suburbia to get my butt kicked. They played a completely different game, the Jamaicans. So the beauty of America is that I don't know what culture we have, but we have many cultures. I think we have to focus on how we're going to create intelligent, skillful players of great character, and then allow the national team coaches to put that into a system of play.
Yeah. Pochettino, I saw his picture up yesterday. Barcelona man, Espanol.
Yeah. His son last year, for the last couple of years, was playing at Nastic de Tarragona.
Oh wow!
So I had good fortune sitting next to Mauricio and watching the matches.
Nice guy.
Oh, great guy. Yeah. Great guy. Obviously a top professional. Has done so well in every organization he's had an opportunity to lead. So, it's coaching. You don't know until a big tournament arises. Beating Jamaica isn't going to be enough. You got to get to a tournament. You've got to do well. You've got to take some steps forward. But when you talk about quality of character and your quality of a person that can lead, the team,
Yeah.
for sure. He comes with great credentials. Now the onus is upon him to prove that he can translate those credentials into something positive with the players that we have. But again, I would put more emphasis on the players' performance than I would on coaches, because we've changed the coaches and the players have been consistent.
100%.
So it's nice to say that it was Bruce's fault,
Yeah.
or that it was
Greg's
Bob's fault,
Yeah.
or Jurgen's fault, or Greg's fault, right? That's an easy, right?
Yeah.
It was their fault. Then we can just
Yeah.
we can moan and groan about each and every one of them along the way. What's common is we've had this group of players that we've deemed to be the golden generation prematurely,
Yeah.
right? Usually you earn something significant, and then later, when you're done playing, they say you were the golden generation retroactively. We made the mistake of naming this generation the golden generation prior to any success on an international tournament. And that's burdened them, I think, in part, and I don't think they've handled it as well as they could, and I think they're going to try to rectify that. I have great faith in the youngsters to do so.
Brilliant. Okay, definitely the last one for you. You give me you always give me a lot of time, and you always go above and beyond for me, so I really appreciate it. Talk about, I think you've got, definitely mentioned the grassroots course, and I think you're doing an in-person one in the new year as well. So let's talk about those and what opportunities there are for coaches.
Yeah, so I mean, this will all be unfolding within the next couple months, but what I recognize is something you mentioned, inherent in those questions, is that we grew organically, and so we put out a methodology course to make the argument for our methodology. But now we have people, thousands of coaches, pro coaches, college coaches, and from the UK, from India, from the United States, from New Zealand, from Canada, Mexico, and others. So what we're doing now is restructuring our portfolio. And what I want to do is present opportunities at every level of the game at price points that are palatable at every level of the game. So we're restructuring the TOVO Academy to include that grassroots coach, that novice, aspiring, or coach that has experience but working with the youngest players. We're going to have the 7-a-side course specifically for coaches. I'm now going to start to build the 9-a-side course, and then we've introduced last spring 11-a-side course. And so it'll be a progression that coaches can take when they want to do it purely online. They can kind of pick what works for them in the context in which they're educating young players and pick the right course at the right price point to go through. Then presentially, we have a celebratory moment. In January, we have 55 children, teenagers coming from around the world to train with us in Sitges, just north up here on the Mediterranean coast. At that time, we have 3 levels of coaching. We have the TOVO 1, the TOVO 2, and the TOVO 3, back to back to back. And we do the introduction to the methodology, then we delve deeper and deeper as that goes on. And typically by 2 and 3, we're dealing with club and college coaches that come. So that's a chance to come to sunny Spain, dig in, glass of wine, some tapas after training, and really see it in action with the children in our charge. So online, in Spain, and the final piece of the puzzle is we're working with clubs now that want to delve in specifically to this methodology, and I hope that the idea would be to eventually over the next few years to have at least one club in each state that is powered by this TOVO methodology. And that's an ambitious goal, but I think we can do it. So between presential courses, let's say, in Spain, courses that we offer in the United States, the online, and then through clubs, I think we'll get a chance to, the goal is to have contact with 26,000 people by the World Cup in 26 that we're hosting on the men's side. So I think when we spoke before, I was just like sharing information, with my cousin.
Yeah.
My cousin was reading the newsletter. Maybe Dan, who's with us, like, I have to read the newsletter because I work for you. So, and my sister and brother. I think I had an audience of 5, and you were foolish enough to invite me into a conversation. We call it TOVO family, and I always use a blue heart, which is that emoji and the blue heart. The TOVO family. So, and it matters to me. It matters because I get it from kids. I get it from former players that are now, even kids that are now graduating from college that will just send you a note. Like, it was a crazy idea back then, but it meant so much to me. And I carry it in my heart. I literally get 5 messages a day from people telling their story. DM, email, call, text, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, Twitter. They just DM. That's why I leave my DM open. Dan, my assistant, says you're ridiculous because you also get questions, but I also get those notes. So I have to say, we're talking about thousands of players and coaches now that the network, and I couldn't say that 7 years ago. Today, I'll see probably 30 people today that will know of TOVO, whereas 7 years ago I would have been here at the snack bar alone. Right, so I do want to say that it is happening. The network is powerful. It helps when you win. And so we still have coaches that are in the Elite 8 and we have players that are going to the Final Four at every division of the college game in the United States, because that's the hot topic right now as we're recording. And we've got coaches that have won conference championships. Josh at JMU, first time ever, conference and tournament championship.
I watched them play a month ago in South Carolina.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a historic event. But remember I told you that Josh focused on maximizing learning and joy?
Yeah.
And as a manifestation of that, a few years later, he's a championship coach for the first time in school history. University of California, Santa Barbara. Paul's doing the same thing.
Paul Stumpf, top man.
Champions.
Yeah.
We've got University of Chicago going deep. Penn State is going deep on the women's side, men's side. So what I can say is that the network is real, it's viable, and it's valuable to me because it means that some crazy idea has taken root. But what's more meaningful to me is that we're promoting learning and joy for the players, and they recognize the beauty in the game in doing so. So, and as I said, I want to thank you for having me on the board because you took a chance with me and having me on early, and that generates a little noise out there in the world of coaching. You've come back to invite me again, and these broadcasts go out, and there's people out there that it matters because after you publish this, I will get probably 20 messages.
Yeah, what are you doing on that?
I said, who is the guy? Is that the guy that lost in the tournament and you're taking advice? So I hope our boys do well so that...
Yeah, what a place. It is it's the most unique landscape, and again, until I got it first time in Spain, and I'm saying that ashamedly as someone from Europe, but like the whole culture has just got this. It's the sunshine, it's the football, but there's like a language of football beyond it. You can feel it everywhere. It's amazing. Yeah.
And it's interesting. You have now with this. It's the way that the game has gone in the United States, particularly the collegiate level. You have a lot of international relationships that are unfolding, right? So, I mean, my boy grew up playing here. And now he's got a chance to go play at Westmont College in Santa Barbara for Morgan, who's a TOVO-style coach, right? He's been with us and just won a championship under this philosophy, Cruyffian philosophy of football. I take no credit for that because he's an amazing coach, as is every other coach. But there's a lot of international connection like this taking place. And that, I think, is a good breeding ground for the exchange of ideas.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And I don't expect everybody to swallow the TOVO Kool-Aid, and it would be a terrible world if people did.
Hey, thank you so much. It's been amazing.
Cheers,
Great
friend.
to catch up.
Good to see you, and welcome. I hope
brilliant.
you enjoy your time here in Catalonia.
Brilliant.
All right, coaches, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. On reflection on that podcast, as much as I enjoyed it, probably shouldn't have set it up right in the middle of the stadium where all the games were going on. Maybe I should have picked somewhere a little bit quieter. So apologies if you experienced any difficulties with the sound. We did our best with it, but again, that's on me that I should have probably put the picture and the setting before any audio quality control. But I really enjoyed chatting to Todd. I always love chatting to him because I feel as if he challenges, again, the status quo of not coaching courses or coach development, just how we think about the game. Again, sometimes when you're working in an environment, you can do it for 5-10 years. You eventually create habits and you eventually revert to processes that can move more towards efficiency and less towards quality. We're all guilty of that there in every component of soccer. I think analysis is guilty of that. I think coaching, leadership is guilty of that. So anytime you've got someone around who can say, listen, that can be done better, or why are we doing this, or why are we still doing this? I think it's really, really healthy. I've seen an evolution in Todd's work over the years, and definitely leading up to this podcast, having an opportunity to see some of his methodology. Again, I had an insider share some information as well and get some feedback on it from a coach who's working in Charleston. It was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. Todd's doing some brilliant, brilliant work. And again, looking at improving decision making within the context of the game. It doesn't have to be isolated training or technique versus decision making and game-based work. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can be skillful enough to work a maneuver in both of them, but there always has to be a why, and there always has to be a priority in terms of what you're doing and why you're doing it at that moment in time. And I think as coaches, if we get into the habit of holding ourselves accountable to that checklist, simple as that, I think we could become better. Then I think it's looking for ways to get better, going outside your comfort zone, quite literally going to Spain, going and speaking to people, going and seeing that. I would definitely recommend it. I don't think coach education is an event. I've said this a long, long time. I don't think it's something you do once every 2 or 3 years to get your badge or get your diploma or get your course. I believe coach education is a process, something that you're passionate about, something that maybe you want to upskill in, something that you want to maybe look at a different angle of the game. Maybe you feel that you're missing out on it. Maybe you just want to improve. maybe you just want to get your views challenged, whatever it is. I think the more Todd Beanes in the world of soccer and football development, I think is going to be better, because they're working from a really, really good place, and that's to make individuals better. And then as individuals get better, hopefully we become better at checking and challenge our own processes. And that only makes our environments better as well. So huge thanks to Todd for jumping on. As always, he gives an awful lot. Please check out the free webinar he did for us a few years ago, just to get a look more of his work. I'll put his information below as well on the TOVO Academy. They're doing a methodology course, I believe starts on March 1st. Definitely check that out, and also sign up for his newsletter too. I'll put that on the information below. Thanks so much for the support. What a year it's been for Modern Soccer Coach. We'll probably do another one before the end of the new year. But thank you so much for all your support. Before you leave today, if you wouldn't mind giving it a like, sharing it with your coaching community. If you want to leave a review, it would be amazing. But the more support we have and the more we can get the content out to the masses, it really, really helps grow everything we do. We are really, really passionate about it, and we really enjoy putting it all together. So it helps that you guys enjoy it, and thanks so much for sharing it. I will see you very soon. Goodbye.